One of the best things of podcasting, at least for me, has been the people that I've met. I have met amazing humans from far and wide, and I have developed sort of online virtual friendships with people from around the globe. So that part of podcasting has been fantastic. All of it's been fantastic, really. One of the women I met, Valen Webb, and Valen, she's a young woman who lost a baby during childbirth, like the baby was born sleeping. So perfectly healthy pregnancy, 9 months of baby moving around, and then you go to the hospital and now the baby dies somehow in process. And these births are often called stillborn. The baby is stillborn, born still, born sleeping. And sometimes there's clear medical reasons why, and sometimes not. It's terrible. So she has taken her journey, her trauma, and gone to school and learned to become certified as a bereavement doula and a pregnancy loss coach, like teacher, leader, really trying to help other women deal with it. I know for me, I've experienced both. I've lost a 25-week pregnancy, which is a long enough time to develop a relationship with a tiny human. And I've lost a 13-year-old. And I will say unequivocally, losing Molly was far more traumatic for me than losing baby Gordy, primarily because I never got to develop a relationship with him. Having said that, I knew all along he was not well. I went through test after test knowing he was not well. I chose to deliver early on my own, so it wasn't the same. I can't imagine what it would have been like going into the hospital with a live Jack in me and then that not working. It would have been devastating, heart-wrenching. We've developed a nice friendship. So she is getting a degree in psychology now. God bless her. So she has a project to do, and I said, oh, well, you can interview me for your project. And it was such an interesting conversation that I had to make it a podcast episode because it's all about self-knowledge and learning. And I think if you listen and follow along with your own life, I'd be hard-pressed for you not to find things that you learn about yourself. So basically, she asked me a series of questions for like 3 different decades out of my life. For the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to walk through them all. You start at the beginning of the decade, you go to the end of the decade. Was there any formative or traumatic events in the decade? Those kinds of things. And how do you go in and how do you come out? And I developed a really distinct pattern for myself. So now that I'm entering my 60s and I'm just, by the time you hear this, I'll be 63. I'm recording it Monday the 27th, so I turn 63 on Wednesday. My eyes are wide open into paying attention to my actions and my words and what I'm doing in my 60s because every decade has had something traumatic in it. Start with 0 to 10, yeah? So 0, obviously a newborn, 10, 5th grade. So for me, my first 5 years of life, the first half of this decade would have been happy and innocent and fine. That's how I remember it. My important people in my life were my family because I was little. My biggest memories are memories at home on Warren Street and the beginning of Essex Street, kindergarten and preschool. I do not have a lot of other memories that don't involve my relatives and my family. Those are my important people. 5 to 10, so the second half of that decade, I remember Dewey School as a happy sort of joyous time. And then I remember Kimball School as cloudy every day. I turned 10, at the end of 4th grade going into 5th. I had massive changes there. That was when my sexual abuse started. So I had a very, very idyllic sort of childhood memory up to about age 8. And then it starts to fall apart and go a bit to hell in a handbasket. My asthma became much more problematic. I have significant memories of asthma attacks in 2nd grade and 3rd grade and needing to go to the hospital and get a shot, and the shot makes you throw up and makes you shaky. And I started really noticing and knowing that I was not healthy. So that's my first 10 years, right? The important people in my life at 10 years old, still my family, a much stronger connection to Tom, my bio dad, a much stronger connection to St. Paul's Church. I spent a lot of time there singing in the choir, youth group, and then going to church on Sundays. So 3 days a week I was at St. Paul's. Kimball School, my teachers, learning things, Trixie Belden novels, all these things just come to my mind. That's the gist of it. Who's important to you in the beginning, who's important in the end? Was there a big event that altered you or changed you? And so my first 10 years of life, the big event would be the first time I was abused. So then we go into 10 to 20. So granted, these 2 decades are significantly different than the others because you go from a newborn to an adult in 2 decades. From 40 to 60, I don't change all that much, right? I'm an adult. I get wrinklier and stiffer, but I don't go from a newborn to, a fully formed human. So 10 to 20, I started the 5th grader. I was very, very, being abused and sick a lot and very, very tumultuous, 10 to 15. However, between age 10 and age 15, I came clean about the abuse. I told about it. My parents separated and divorced. Then they remarried. I went to gymnastics camp, and that was fun, and I identified as a gymnast and got very involved and developed a whole new group of friends and started to look at my body more athletically. And then the year I was 15, I started running, right? So that was pretty significant for me in that decade. From 15 to 20, so 10 to 15, gymnastics, I begin the running journey. 15 to 20, running, running, running. At age 15, I was a brand new runner, 5:24. That was my best mile, but I loved it, fell in love with it. Then 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 came high school track, becoming famous, running really well, going to national championships, meeting other runners, falling in love with Jay. So, losing my virginity, all of those things that happened actually quite young, but those were traumatic events for me. Getting a full ride to BU, getting Division I All-American, running really fast, being the first goal to break 5 minutes in the mile, full of huge changing events in my from 10 to 20, which I think all of us would. I think anyone listening would also have massive big changes in that decade. From 15 to 20, my life transformed and really set the stage for the next 20 years after that. So 20 to 30, now we're getting into the changes aren't so much physical as societal and occupational in what you're doing. So at age 20, I was in college at Boston University. I was drinking like a fish, except when I wasn't. I was always good at quitting. Was running track. I was dating David in my early 20s, really all the way through. And from 20 to 25, I graduated college. I went to grad school. I graduated grad school. And I started my teaching career. I got a teaching job in Woburn, Massachusetts when I was 24 and was a full-time teacher sort of from then on. I went from dating David, then to dating Seb, then to sort of back to dating David. What a disaster. I was just a mess. I also started significant therapy at that time. In the middle of that decade, I moved back to Concord. I broke up with David. I started dating Chaz. I taught at Second Start for a year and that got a teaching job in the school district, which would begin the next a long time. And so by the time I turned 30, I've dated Graham. I've dated Chaz, then I've dated Graham. And I've gone to Greenacre to teach children's classes. I've become sober. I'm going to AA regularly. And I go to Greenacre and I fall in love with and marry Eric. So I start my 20s a college student, thick in the throes of being a Division I distance runner, college and graduating and then starting my teaching career and then moving home and continuing the teaching career, having a couple more very significant relationships. Jim and Chaz were both, multi-year relationships, 2 years or so each. Each one ended abruptly for the next one. And then the next one was my marriage to Eric. So I start that decade quite single, and I finish that decade at Greenacre and meeting Eric. The people important in my life at the end of that decade were Concord people, Walker School people, because I was teaching at Walker. I was coaching cross country by this time, so I had developed a huge rapport with my athletes and their families, and I had really just ingrained myself back into Concord. I was home, and I was doing all the things that Mr. Ludi did. I was teaching and coaching, really developing a career for myself. So 63 to 73, 73 to 83, 83 to 93 was my 20 to 30. Then I turned 30, and I am enveloped in a Baha'i life. I'm married to Eric, but I'm incredibly unhappy. I think I realized quite early on this was a massive mistake, a very impulsive decision, relying too much on God and feeling a bit culty, quite honestly, about all of that. So from 30 to 35, I was married to Eric for a spell. I went to Israel on pilgrimage. That was a significant event. That was in 1994. Still coaching and teaching, so my professional life had stayed solid. Almost went to Michigan for a year, and then I didn't, and I'm really glad I didn't. I think that might have, I don't know, it would have changed things, right? You can't wish to undo things. You really can't. And then in my mid-30s, my marriage really was falling apart, and Eric moved to Greenacre and was living there all the time, and I was at the apartment. He would come home periodically. I began sort of a covert relationship with Rothenberg. That was on again, off again. And I met and fell in love with Kenny. The weird thing in my 30s, it was 93 to 03, 30 to 40. I met Kenny on the day that 20 years later we would finalize the decision to remove Molly from life support, May 6th. So 1993, so that was still early in my 30s, early in that decade. So at that point I was still running and racing competitively, road races and things. I was mostly coaching. I was seeing Graham at that time. My relationship with Chaz had ended. And I went on a field trip to Washington, D.C. because Bill Clinton had come to Walker School, and I met Kenny. So began what would be a truly life-changing journey in my relationship with Kenny. So when I was 35, from 30 to 35, I'd gotten married 2 months after I turned 30. My divorce was finalized not till 99. Kenny came in 98. So 5 years into my 30 to 40 decade, at age 35, Kenny moved into my house. We began, our lifetime together. So from 30 to 35, I was married, separated, bought a house by myself, moved in together with Kenny. That's a big 5 years. So the 5 year sort of trauma would have been divorcing Eric, moving in with Kenny, and then getting pregnant with baby Gordy. So that happened when I was 35, turning 36. Right. So I have I lose that baby. That's a hugely traumatic event. Solidifies my desire to be a mother, however. Had I not had and then lost baby Gordy, I likely would not have had Gracie, because having kids wasn't at all in my wheelhouse. I really didn't think I wanted to have children. So I conceived Gracie, have her at 37. 2 years later, I conceive and have Molly. I have her at 39. I turn 40 the following summer. So I go into my 30s single. The day I turned 30, I was still single. I come out of my 30s into my 40s, having lost a child, divorced Eric, married Kenny, and had 2 children. So when I turned 40, I was a mother of 2 daughters, living in this big giant house with Kenny, ready to start my happy life. So again, from start to finish, very different. The people in my life when I was 30 were the Baha'i community, Eric. In my 40s, it was Kenny, it was Kenny's kids, it was our kids, it was my teaching and coaching community, it was friends that we hung out with together. It was a completely different, 10 years. So do you see a pattern here? Every decade for me starts and finishes drastically different. And there's always something that happens that is not even in my wheelhouse in the beginning of that decade. So now we have 40 to 50. And this is when my life just really starts to explode and fall apart. So at age 40, Molly's a newborn. At age 42, I have and lose a baby right away. I don't have the baby. I get pregnant and lose it right away. And at that point, we decide for Kenny to have a vasectomy. And I think over and over again, had that pregnancy taken, how different my life would be. I think Molly would be alive. I really feel like that's the turning point for me, because I wasn't pregnant and then I met crazy Amy. And so I was 42 when I met them. That was November of 42. And so Gracie was 3 and Molly was 1. Well, she was 2 and they were 4. 2 and 4. Yeah, that was it. I meet crazy Amy and Roy, and so begins a very tumultuous 3-year span. So at 45, halfway into that decade, I have pulled very far away from Amy. Roy and Amy have separated because Amy's had an affair and gotten a restraining order against Roy, which I helped her get, which was fake. That we've all been through that. That's a whole podcast season of its own. But I was involved in that. It was tumultuous. I took a sabbatical. I loved my work. I went from teaching at Walker School to teaching at Concord High School. And then all hell broke loose. Roy came back. I agreed to help him. I realize now how utterly manipulated into that I was. Really just manipulated into it. And that began the dissolution and the decimation of my marriage and my family happiness. A year into that situation was his divorce hearing. I testified there. To get back at me, Amy went to Chris Rath and falsified all sorts of emails and made up all these lies about me, and I ended up being forced to resign. A 20-year teaching career over. So at age 40, I'm happily married. I have 2 new babies. This is the life. And by 45, 46 or so, it's decimated. Everything is a mess. I've lost my job. I'm a mess. I can't run because running is painful. I'm no longer coaching. Everything I had built for 20 years, gone in one note in a backpack asking somebody to be her child's friend. That was that. So 45 to 50 was rebuilding. I got into CrossFit, which was a great thing. I don't know if I would have found CrossFit, which I would hate because I love it so much right now. Although perhaps I would still be big into running. So who knows? It's all just so hard to say. I was rebuilding. So from 40 to 45, it was my family. The end of that 5-year period was Roy, and then the decimation of my job loss. 45 to 50 was rebuilding community through CrossFit, my doomed friendship with Robin Grant, which when I turned 50 was still quite fine. I was doing okay in 2013. So 2003 to 2013, again, 2003 is having a baby named Molly. 2013 is 2 years into my job loss and rebuilding a life, teaching at VLAX, doing CrossFit, becoming fit, and maintaining this unhealthy connection with Roy. So I turned 50, the big 50, halfway to 100. And I'm teaching, but online. I'm working at Flips. I'm doing a variety of different things there. So that 10-year period saw me remain in education, so to speak, but completely different. who was important in the first 5 years, was very, very family oriented. In the second 5 years, I pulled away so much from all aspects of my family, and my friend group was completely different. It was people at the CrossFit gym that only knew this version of Barb, right? It was my CrossFit community. It was Roy and friends that we had. We didn't really have a friend group, so to speak, but people that he knew. Very, very different. If you asked me at 40 what I thought 10 years would look like, I just would have thought it would look like Molly and Gracie being teenagers and my life sort of being the same. Again, you have the middle section where there's some big traumatic event. So then 50 to 60. So this is obviously the worst because it's Molly. So age 50, I'm still a sort of a disastrous mess. I'm trying to balance all these multiple levels of reality. My trauma bond with Roy and that abject fear that he was so good at instilling in everything I would lose and everything that was bad. And all I'd lost and feeling like I was stuck in that situation. Gracie and Molly were doing wonderfully. They were so dancing and, they were just dancing and having fun with life and comp team and getting into theater. It was a year later they got into theater in 2014. The first 3 years of that, the first 2 years and 5 months were fantastic of that decade. And then Molly dies. So Molly's death stops all of it, right? Everything just stops. I'm sitting in a pile of rubble for a long time. So from 53 to 55 or 56 or so, I'm a disastrous mess. And then comes the process of Jack. The first 5 years, initially my social circle is my family, Kenny, my mother, the girls, Concord Dance Academy, the girls' activities, developed into the theater community, the CrossFit community still. Then Molly dies, and now I have this whole new community online. Other people who have lost children. I have the lawsuit. I have an entirely different reality. I have a massive drug addiction. And then comes the process of having Jack. In that process, brain tumor surgery. Then I get pregnant. Then I do the TV commercial. So from all of this tumult and all of this craziness, I have a baby. And so he's born when I'm 57. I turn 58 that summer. So the last 2 years of my reality are Jack, dealing with all that goes along with having a baby at 57, some pretty intense postpartum panic. I was never depressed postpartum, but I definitely was unstable. When it came out this time in anger, it was Jack's birth that had me start a podcast, and I'm sure glad I did, in a blog. CrossFit was a solid. I started a CrossFitter and I still am a CrossFitter. I haven't lost that element of myself. But when I went into my 50s, I had two live daughters who were entering their teenage years. And when I ended my 50s and turned 60, I had a dead daughter and a live daughter and a 2-year-old child. So no idea that these things would be happening. So now here I am. I'm going to be 63 in 2 days. And my biggest fear right now is the anticipation of what traumatic thing is going to happen next. Like, what is it? What is it? Because so far in my 60s, I've lost my dad. My mom's moved in here, and that comes with its own set of challenges. Kenny and I are better, but we still struggle. How do you not struggle when you've gone through what we've gone through? Gracie is in Paris now, working for Disney. That's a huge change for her, which is a change for all of us. And I have 5 years under my belt as a podcaster and a blogger. So I ended my 60s. I ended my 60 decade 2 years into a podcast as well. So I was an educator and now not working in education so much, but podcasting and blogging. Coaching CrossFit, that's another huge thing that happened to me in my 60s. It was super helpful for me. I coach at CrossFit Amesbury. I coach at Amaskeg. It's been really, really good to get back into the coaching. I coached at Bo. So that was before Jack. So that was in my 50s. That was another traumatic event in my 50s. The girl at Bo that made up horrible, horrible lies and humiliating time. Yeah. I do not live a boring life. Good God. So anyway, now here I am 60, almost 63. I'm winding down the podcast, and it's not because I don't like podcasting. I do, but I'm all over the place now. And if I'm just going to Facebook Live my podcast episodes, then I should just do lives. I should post live videos on a YouTube page and leave it at that and have a following that way. Podcasting is much more structured and organized and requires a lot more technology than I have for myself. And I have to rethink finances as I age and the realities of my life change. And what do I do next? So I come into my 60s, a mother of two, a small boy and a grown-up girl. I come into my 60s losing Mr. Higgins' dad and gaining my mother as a roommate, a housemate. I come into my 60s spending a lot of time coaching CrossFit and sort of running around. I remain on school board. That's been another constant, but that could be a big shift. I have many things in my life that I'm ready to change. And I've talked about that quite a bit. And maybe the sign from this little interview with Valen and how tumultuous my decades have been is that I need to slow down and pay attention to my feelings. And I know that I need a change. I don't want to keep doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it. I'm not happy. At the same time, I'm very happy with a lot of things. As I wind down on this version of the podcaster that is Barb Higgins, I look at my life as 5-year increments where every 5 years there's an event. Actually, it's every 10 years there's an event, kind of. Every decade of my life has had an event somewhere in the middle of that decade that forms the next decade, which then has an event that forms the next decade. And maybe that's just the circle of life. Maybe there's nothing odd about that at all. But I know a lot of people that haven't had massive job losses and massive child losses and brain tumors and babies in their 50s and all of the things that have happened to me. I'm hopeful and prayerful that whatever the big event is in my 60s, it's a happy event, like a good event, so that when I turn 70, I can turn around and say, okay, when I turned 60, I was this, and now I'm this, and not have some heart-wrenchingly difficult traumatic event behind me that describes it. I sit here at age 63, almost, with a very busy day ahead of me. I have a lot of tedious tasks that I need to get done that I don't always enjoy. And Jack is at dance camp. At 63, a new thing I've done is I've done a couple of new things in my 60s. I've hosted a golf tournament, and another one will be coming. I just finished a musical theater camp. Yep. And I was the music teacher and the theater teacher. Go figure. And I have started the Molly B Foundation, and I have held a gala and parties and things at the Capitol Center for the Arts. So I'm getting there. I'm race director of a couple of road races. I'm doing a lot of things. I need to develop organization and discipline in the tedious tasks, and that I am building. So that's me as I come to the 5-year conclusion of an amazing podcast journey. A couple more episodes, I think. Yeah, we'll see what happens next. If you have any ideas or, suggestions, I'm open. I'm an open book right now. I'm not sure what awaits, but we'll see. What have your decades been like? So, as always, be good to yourself, treat yourself well, take time to slow down and listen. Another thing I've started doing is going for a walk every morning. And sometimes it's just around the park, which is quite plenty. It's been fantastic. So good for me to walk. So I'm going to stick with that. I am now training for a high rocks race, a couple of high rocks races, a partner race with my friend Pam in October, and a single race in France in December. So be good to yourself. Organize your life. Be good to someone else. Compliment somebody. Give them helpful advice. Well, maybe only if they ask for it, but... And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444. On Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.